The lonely Apache took in a deaf girl, only to discover she could hear his heart, Western love tales. His dark eyes scanned the horizon with the careful attention of someone who had spent years living alone in the wilderness. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, and the distant calls of birds reminded him that life, even in the emptiness, was still moving. For Takoda, life had become quiet, almost too quiet, after the loss of his family many seasons ago. He had grown used to solitude, finding comfort in the rhythm of nature and the routine of survival. Every day was a careful balance of hunting, gathering, and making sure he stayed safe in a world that had often been cruel. He carried a small bow in his hand, its wood worn smooth from years of use. He moved carefully, stepping lightly over rocks and dry branches, aware of every sound. Hunting was more than survival. It was a way to feel connected to the land, to honor those who had walked before him. Takoda had learned to read the signs of the wild. The broken branch that showed a deer had passed, the footprints near the river that spoke of animals searching for water. Today, though, his hunt felt different. His heart seemed heavier, and the usual thrill of tracking prey was replaced with a quiet unease. As he followed a trail toward the creek, he noticed something unusual. There, half hidden among the reeds, was the small figure of a girl. She crouched close to the water, her clothes dirty and torn and her thin hair tangled with bits of grass. She looked frightened, glancing around as if the wind itself might harm her. Takoda slowed, not wanting to startle her. There was something fragile about her, a sense that she had been alone for too long. His heart, which had grown used to solitude, tightened at the sight. The girl did not seem to notice him at first. She reached out to touch the water with her small hands, then pulled them back quickly as if afraid it might burn her. Takoda watched for a long moment, his instincts telling him to leave her alone. In another time, he might have passed her by, thinking it safer for both of them. But something deep inside him would not allow it. He had seen too much loss to ignore another soul in need. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling down so he would not seem threatening. His voice was calm, gentle, carrying the kind of warmth that only comes from experience and care. The girl froze, her wide eyes meeting his. He noticed then that she did not flinch at his voice, but she did not respond either. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. Takoda realized quickly that she could not hear him. He raised his hand slowly, showing a simple sign for peace, a gesture he had learned long ago from travelers and traders. The girl's eyes widened, and she mirrored his movements hesitantly. There was no fear in her, just a cautious curiosity. It was enough for Takoda to know that she was not dangerous, and he stepped a little closer, careful not to scare her away. Over the next few hours, he watched her carefully. She ate berries she found by the creek, drank from the water, and moved with a quiet grace that reminded him of the deer he often tracked. He could see that she had been alone for some time, surviving the elements with nothing but her own courage. His heart ached for her. She needed care, food, warmth, and most of all, someone to trust. Takoda had spent years building walls around himself, but now those walls seemed unnecessary. Somehow, he knew that helping her was the right thing. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Takoda decided it was time to act. He carefully approached the girl, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He extended his hand, offering her a small piece of dried meat he had carried from the previous day's hunt. The girl hesitated but eventually reached out, taking it with a small, grateful nod. It was a small connection, but it was enough. Takoda smiled gently, a rare gesture that seemed almost foreign on his weathered face. He motioned for her to follow him, pointing toward the path that led back to his cabin. She looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes, but then she nodded slightly and took tentative steps in his direction. Takoda's heart swelled with a quiet hope he had not felt in many years. For the first time in a long while, he felt needed, not just as a hunter or a protector of the land, but as a human being capable of giving care and love. The journey back to the cabin was slow. Takoda moved carefully, watching the girl's steps and guiding her over uneven ground. She seemed curious about everything, touching leaves, examining rocks, and staring at the small animals that scurried across their path. Takoda did not rush her. He understood that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He spoke softly, using signs and gestures, showing her that she was safe and that he meant no harm. Slowly, the tension in her small frame began to ease. When they reached the cabin, a small wooden structure built near a grove of trees, Takoda motioned for her to enter. The cabin was modest but warm, with a small fire burning in the hearth and simple tools and supplies neatly arranged. The smell of dried herbs and the faint scent of smoke filled the air. He showed her a blanket on the floor, a place where she could rest. She looked around with wide eyes, absorbing everything, and then curled up on the blanket. Takoda gave her a small smile, feeling a deep sense of relief that she had accepted his help. That evening, Takoda prepared a simple meal of roasted meat and gathered fresh water for her. She watched him with keen eyes, studying his movements and trying to understand. He realized that she was more observant than most people he had met. Every glance, every gesture carried meaning. Though she could not hear, she seemed to feel the care and attention behind his actions. Takoda felt a quiet bond forming, one that did not require words or sound. It was a connection of trust, patience, and the shared understanding of life's fragility. As night fell over the plains, the stars came out one by one, sparkling in the endless sky. Takoda sat by the fire, keeping watch over the girl as she slept. Her breathing was soft and even, a sign that she finally felt safe. Takoda looked out over the land, feeling a strange mix of peace and responsibility. He had chosen to bring her into his life, and that choice carried a weight he had not expected. But for the first time in many years, he did not feel the sharp sting of loneliness. Instead, he felt a quiet warmth, a gentle reassurance that life could still bring unexpected gifts. In the days that followed, Takoda began to teach the girl small skills for survival. He showed her how to gather herbs, track small animals, and build simple traps. She learned quickly, her hands steady and her eyes focused. Though she could not hear his words, she understood through his actions and the patience he showed her. Every small success brought a sense of accomplishment and pride to both of them. The cabin, once a place of solitude, began to feel alive with quiet energy and shared purpose. Takoda often thought about the girl's past, imagining the hardships she must have faced alone. He did not ask. He did not need to. Her eyes and gestures spoke volumes, telling him of struggles, fear, and resilience. He felt protective of her, not out of obligation, but because he had come to care for her deeply. In teaching her, guiding her, and sharing his life, he had found a sense of connection that had long been missing. Evenings became a time for quiet reflection. Takoda would sit by the fire, sometimes humming softly, and the girl would watch him with curiosity. Though she could not hear, she seemed to sense the rhythm, the emotion behind the sound. It was as if she could feel his heart speaking in ways that words never could. Takoda did not know it yet, but this connection would soon reveal something extraordinary, something that would change both of their lives forever. For now, the world outside continued as it always had, harsh and unforgiving, but inside the cabin, there was a fragile peace. Takoda and the girl, two souls brought together by chance, began a journey of trust, understanding, and quiet companionship. In the vastness of the plains, where the wind whispered secrets and the stars watched over all, a lonely heart had found a companion, and a small, silent girl had found safety at last. Days passed slowly on the wide plains, each one blending into the next, yet each carrying its own quiet rhythm. Takoda and the girl, who he now called Leela, began to settle into a shared routine. Though their world was silent for her, it was far from empty. Every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig, and every distant call of an animal became a small adventure for Leela, and Takoda watched with quiet amusement as she discovered things he often overlooked in his solitary life. Leela's curiosity was endless. She touched everything with gentle hands, examining the shapes and textures of leaves, stones, and the occasional feather that floated to the ground. Takoda noticed the small ways she adapted to her silence. She used her eyes and hands with an attention to detail he had rarely seen. She noticed the subtle movements of birds and animals, the changes in the clouds, and the way the firelight flickered across the cabin walls. It amazed him that she could absorb so much without hearing a single sound. Takoda tried to teach her simple things. He showed her how to start a fire using dry wood and stone, how to track deer without scaring them away, and how to find clean water in streams. He used signs and gestures, pointing to objects, drawing shapes in the dirt, and miming actions. Leela copied him carefully, her small hands learning to mimic the precise movements. When she succeeded, her face lit up with a wide, bright smile, and Takoda felt a deep satisfaction. It was a quiet kind of pride, not loud or boastful, but real. At first, communication was slow. Takoda spoke and Leela looked puzzled. He tried gestures and sometimes she misunderstood, but over time, a language began to form between them. Simple signs became their own code. A pointing finger meant go, a small wave meant come here, and a hand over the heart meant safe or kind. Takoda realized that even without words, trust could grow and understanding could thrive. Leela taught Takoda too. She had ways of seeing things he sometimes missed. She noticed when a branch had been chewed by a rabbit, or when a cloud meant a storm was coming. She had an almost instinctive sense of nature, and Takoda began to rely on her quiet observations. Slowly, he understood that even in silence, she was speaking volumes. Her presence brought a rhythm to his life, one that had been missing for many long years. Some days, Takoda would take Leela on short trips beyond the cabin. They walked along the river, collecting smooth stones and interesting plants. Leela laughed silently when a frog jumped too close to her feet, waving her hands in surprise. Takoda chuckled quietly at her reactions, a sound she could not hear but seemed to understand through his gentle gestures and the warmth in his eyes. These walks were not just about survival. They were lessons in life, in observation, and in companionship. One evening, after a long day of gathering berries and herbs, Takoda and Leela sat by the fire. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, and the wind carried the soft scent of blooming wildflowers. Takoda was tired but content. He began humming softly to himself, a habit he had when he felt peaceful or thoughtful. Leela paused, tilting her head slightly. Though she could not hear the melody, she seemed to feel something in the vibrations, in the way Takoda's chest moved, in the calm that surrounded him. She reached out and placed her small hand over his, as if acknowledging the quiet song of his heart. This moment marked a subtle but powerful shift. Takoda realized that Leela could sense more than just his actions. She could sense his feelings. Her eyes were gentle, filled with understanding, and he felt seen in a way he had not experienced in many years. The loneliness that had weighed on him for so long began to ease, replaced with a tender warmth. He realized that he had grown attached to her, not just as someone he was protecting, but as someone who mattered deeply to him. Their bond strengthened in small, everyday ways. Leela learned to prepare simple meals with Takoda, helping to gather roots, grind corn, and cook over the fire. She took pride in small achievements, and Takoda encouraged her with patient gestures. When she succeeded, he would touch her shoulder lightly, a silent acknowledgement of her effort and skill. These small acts of recognition spoke more than words ever could. Takoda also began to open up more about his past. Not with words, but with stories told through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and the careful showing of old belongings. He showed Leela a worn bow, explaining how he had learned to use it, and demonstrated the careful art of crafting arrows. He pointed to a faded photograph of his family and traced the faces gently. Leela watched intently, sensing the emotions hidden in these memories. She responded with soft, reassuring gestures, placing her hand over his when he lingered on a sad memory. It was as if she understood that grief and love could coexist, and that the heart could heal even in the quietest ways. One morning, Takoda noticed a change in Leela. She was more confident, moving with a quiet grace as she explored the cabin and surrounding land. She began to anticipate his actions, handing him tools before he asked, preparing small meals and helping with chores. Takoda realized that she was not just learning from him, she was becoming a partner in their small world. Her presence lightened his burden, and together they created a life that was richer and fuller than either could have imagined alone. Despite their closeness, Takoda remained careful. He knew the world outside could be harsh, and he worried about how others might react to a young girl alone with a man in the wilderness. He had seen greed, cruelty, and misunderstanding, and he wanted to protect her at all costs. He watched the horizon often, sensing danger in the slightest shift of the wind or the sound of distant hooves. Leela seemed to sense his unease as well. She would reach out, take his hand, or touch his shoulder, offering silent reassurance. It was in these quiet exchanges that Takoda truly understood the depth of their connection. Evenings became their time for reflection and bonding. They would sit together by the fire, sharing small tasks, telling stories through gestures, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Takoda noticed the subtle ways Leela's eyes followed him, her attention filled with curiosity and understanding. She watched the way he worked, the care he put into every action, and she seemed to absorb not just the lessons but the spirit behind them. Takoda felt a deep gratitude for her companionship, realizing that he had found a connection that went beyond words, beyond sound, and beyond simple survival. One afternoon, a storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the sky like a warning. Takoda moved quickly to secure the cabin, showing Leela how to tie down supplies and gather firewood to last through the heavy rain. Leela followed every instruction, her hands steady and her mind sharp. When the storm hit, they huddled together inside, listening to the wind howl and the rain beat against the roof. Though she could not hear the storm, she sensed its power through the vibrations and movement of the cabin. Takoda placed his hand over hers, a silent gesture of safety, and she leaned against him, trusting him completely. By the time the storm passed, Takoda understood something profound. Life was unpredictable, often harsh and full of challenges, but with someone by your side who understood your heart, even silently, the weight of the world became lighter. Leela had become more than a companion. She had become a part of him, a reason to hope, a reason to care deeply again. Their bond was built on trust, patience, and an understanding that did not require words. It was a quiet love, gentle but strong, capable of withstanding the hardships of the plains and the silence of the world around them. As the sun rose after the storm, painting the sky in soft gold, Takoda and Leela stepped outside. The world was fresh, cleansed by rain and full of life. Birds sang in the trees and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Takoda glanced at Leela and saw the same wonder in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. Together, they walked forward, ready to face the days ahead. Though the world was vast and often lonely, they had found something rare and precious, a connection that transcended words, a bond that spoke through actions, and a quiet understanding of the heart. In the silence of the plains, among the whispering winds and the endless sky, Takoda and Leela were no longer alone. They had found each other, and in that discovery, they had begun to build a life filled with trust, care, and the promise of something extraordinary. The days grew warmer as summer settled over the plains. Takoda and Leela had grown used to their routines, and the small cabin felt like a home rather than a shelter. Takoda often found himself watching Leela as she moved quietly around the space, her hands busy with chores or small projects she had begun on her own. It was remarkable to him how she learned so quickly, how she noticed things he sometimes missed, and how she seemed to understand him without ever hearing his voice. Every day brought a small surprise, a small lesson, and a growing sense of connection that filled the empty spaces of his life. One morning, Takoda decided it was time to teach Leela a skill he had mastered long ago, riding a horse. He led a calm, sturdy mare from the stable, brushing her soft coat until it shone in the sunlight. Leela's eyes widened with excitement and a little nervousness. She reached out to touch the horse gently, and Takoda smiled at her careful movements. He motioned for her to climb onto the saddle, using slow, clear gestures to guide her. She hesitated at first, but with his patient encouragement, she managed to sit safely on the horse's back. The first ride was slow. Takoda walked beside the horse, holding the reins and guiding Leela through gentle movements. He showed her how to balance, how to hold herself, and how to sense the horse's steps. Leela's face was a mixture of concentration and joy. Though she could not hear the horse's neighs or the sound of hooves on the ground, she seemed to feel everything through motion and touch. Takoda watched her carefully, proud of her courage and quick learning. For him, it was more than teaching a skill. It was a moment of trust and shared adventure. As the days passed, Leela became more confident. She learned to guide the horse herself, feeling its movements and responding with subtle shifts of weight. Takoda noticed something extraordinary. She could sense his presence and mood in ways he had never expected. When he was tense or cautious, she hesitated slightly. When he was calm and gentle, she moved with ease. It was as if she could hear not with her ears but with her heart. Takoda felt a stirring of wonder and amazement. How could she perceive him so clearly without words or sound? It was a gift, one that deepened the bond between them. One evening, after a long ride across the plains, Takoda and Leela returned to the cabin. The sky was streaked with red and gold, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed earth. Leela climbed down from the horse, brushing dust from her simple clothes, and looked at Takoda with a quiet intensity. He felt her gaze, and a sudden warmth spread through his chest. There was something in her eyes, a recognition, an understanding that went beyond words. He realized then that she was more than observant. She was attuned to his very heart. That night, as they sat by the fire, Takoda hummed softly again, a habit that had become part of their evenings. Leela watched him closely, tilting her head as if she could feel the vibrations in the air, the rhythm of his chest, the pulse of his heartbeat. Takoda suddenly understood. She could sense his emotions in ways that were invisible to most people. She was hearing his heart. It was a revelation that both thrilled and humbled him. He had spent years hiding his feelings, guarding his heart against loneliness and loss, yet here was someone who could perceive it all without a single word. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day. Takoda began to share more of himself, showing Leela small personal things he had never revealed to anyone. He showed her his hunting bow, the way he carved simple wooden figures, and even the small keepsakes he had collected over the years, tokens of memories, both joyful and painful. Leela listened in her own way, watching his hands, studying his eyes, and responding with gestures that spoke of empathy and understanding. Takoda realized that he no longer needed to speak to feel heard. She could see his soul in the smallest of actions. Takoda also began to notice subtle changes in Leela. She was becoming more confident and independent, yet she remained deeply connected to him. She anticipated his movements, helped without being asked, and offered comfort when he seemed weary or thoughtful. One afternoon, while he repaired a broken fence, Leela placed a small hand on his arm, a simple gesture that conveyed reassurance and trust. Takoda stopped for a moment, looking into her eyes, and felt a deep gratitude for her presence. She was no longer just a girl he protected. She was a companion, a friend, and a guide in ways he had never expected. The bond between them was tested one day when a wild horse appeared near their cabin. It was a magnificent animal, but nervous and unpredictable. Leela froze at the sight, unsure of what to do. Takoda approached carefully, using calm gestures to show that there was no danger. He motioned for her to step back, then slowly led the horse away from the cabin, talking to it in the soft, rhythmic tones he had learned from experience. Leela watched, fascinated, and as she observed him, she seemed to sense his confidence and calm. The horse eventually settled, and Takoda led it to a nearby meadow, allowing it to graze safely. Leela clapped her hands silently in delight, and Takoda felt a quiet joy in her simple happiness. Life on the plains was not always easy. There were times when food was scarce, storms threatened their shelter, and the heat of summer made work exhausting. But together, Takoda and Leela faced every challenge. They shared meals, divided tasks, and supported each other in ways that went beyond survival. Takoda began to feel a deep contentment, a sense of fulfillment he had never known in his years of solitude. Leela's silent presence was a constant reminder that even in a harsh world, connection, trust, and care could flourish. One afternoon, as they rested by the river, Takoda noticed Leela studying the water intently. She had found a small fish, struggling in a shallow pool. Using gestures, Takoda showed her how to help it back into the deeper water, ensuring its safety. Leela watched closely, then carefully released the fish, her small hands trembling with the effort. Takoda smiled quietly. It was a small act, but it symbolized the lessons they were teaching each other, not just survival, but compassion, patience, and respect for all living things. As summer wore on, Takoda began to feel something he had not felt in many years: hope. It was not the loud, boastful kind of hope that demanded attention. It was quiet, steady, and deep. He had found someone who could understand him, who could sense his emotions, and who could share the burdens of life without complaint or expectation. Leela had become more than a companion. She was a reflection of his own heart, a mirror that allowed him to see both his strength and his vulnerability. Evenings remained their favorite time. They would sit together, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Takoda would hum softly, and Leela would place her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heart. These moments became their language, a way of speaking without words, of sharing without sound. Takoda realized that in Leela's presence he could be fully himself, honest, open, and unafraid. She had become his family, his teacher, and his closest friend, all in one. One evening, a breeze carried the scent of distant rain, and Takoda noticed Leela's eyes following the horizon. She seemed to sense the coming change in the weather, alerting him with a small gesture. Takoda smiled, realizing that she was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. Together, they prepared for the storm, securing the cabin and gathering firewood. When the rain finally fell, they sat together, warm and dry, feeling the comfort of shared effort and mutual care. Takoda's heart swelled with quiet pride and affection for the small girl who had come into his life. It was in these ordinary, simple moments that Takoda realized something extraordinary. Leela could hear more than just sounds. She could hear feelings, sense intentions, and understand the language of the heart. In a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, they had created a sanctuary of trust, love, and understanding. Takoda felt a deep gratitude for the girl who had entered his life and transformed it in ways he could never have imagined. In the stillness of the night, as the fire burned low and the stars shone brightly, Takoda reflected on the changes in his life. He had come to care for Leela not just as someone to protect, but as a companion who made his life richer, fuller, and more meaningful. The plains, which had once felt empty and lonely, now held the promise of shared adventure, quiet joy, and the subtle, profound magic of understanding without words. And so, as the wind whispered softly through the tall grasses, and the moon cast its silver light over the cabin, Takoda and Leela sat together, bound by trust, love, and the quiet understanding of two hearts that had found each other in the vast, endless wilderness. In the silence of the plains, something extraordinary was taking root, a connection deeper than speech, stronger than fear, and more beautiful than either had dared to hope. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm for Takoda and Leela, yet the vastness of the plains meant that danger could arrive without warning. One morning, Takoda noticed unusual signs near the edge of the trees, a broken branch, footprints that did not belong to deer or wild horses. His eyes narrowed as he examined the tracks. They were human, not local, and carried a sense of purpose. He did not know who these people were, but instinct told him to be cautious. The plains were beautiful, but they were also home to those who did not understand kindness, patience, or trust. Takoda kept the discovery to himself for the time being, not wanting to worry Leela. He had learned long ago that fear could cloud judgment. Instead, he quietly reinforced the cabin, securing doors and windows, checking the firewood stacks, and moving their small supplies to safer places. Leela watched him curiously, noticing the care in his movements. She could sense the tension in his body, the quiet alertness in his eyes. Without a word, she followed his instructions, helping where she could, passing him tools, arranging firewood, and mirroring his careful gestures. As days passed, the presence of outsiders became clearer. Takoda spotted distant figures on the ridge, moving slowly but steadily, and he could see that they were heading in their direction. He did not know their intentions, but he knew that he had to be ready. Takoda had faced danger before, though never with someone as precious to him as Leela depending on his protection. He taught her subtle ways to stay safe, moving quietly, hiding when needed, and trusting her instincts. She absorbed every lesson with sharp focus, understanding that their survival depended on their connection and teamwork. The first encounter came one evening when the sun was low, painting the sky in gold and amber. A group of travelers approached the cabin, curious and cautious. Takoda stood at the edge of the clearing, his posture calm but alert. He gestured for Leela to stay behind, but she quietly joined him, her eyes steady and attentive. The strangers did not see fear in her, they only saw the calm connection between the two. Takoda's silent strength, combined with Leela's quiet courage, made an impression even before words were spoken. The travelers were curious about Leela, asking questions and pointing toward her. Takoda used gestures to keep them at a distance, showing that she was under his care. He watched their expressions carefully, reading their intentions through body language and tone. Some of them were simply curious, perhaps even impressed, but others carried a glint of greed or distrust in their eyes. Takoda knew that he could not rely on words alone. He had to act carefully, showing respect, but also ensuring that Leela was safe. Over the next few days, Takoda and Leela strengthened their routines in response to the outsiders. Takoda taught Leela how to move silently through the tall grass, how to spot tracks in the dirt, and how to find hidden water sources. She learned quickly, her hands steady and her movements precise. Takoda watched her, amazed at how much she could understand without hearing a single word. She seemed to sense not just the physical dangers, but the emotional atmosphere around them, alertness, caution, patience, and even trust. Their bond became stronger under this pressure, and Takoda realized that Leela's presence was not just comforting, it was essential. One night, a loud noise broke the stillness. Takoda sprang to his feet, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the cabin. Leela reached out and touched his arm, her small hand steadying him. Takoda realized that she had sensed the fear, the tension, even without a word. He nodded to her quietly, showing that they would face it together. Slowly, carefully, they moved to a hidden spot near the trees, where they could watch the intruders without being seen. The strangers were exploring the edge of the cabin, curious and cautious. Takoda's heart pounded, but he kept his movements calm. Leela's hand remained on his, grounding him in the quiet strength of their shared trust. Over the next days, Takoda devised a plan to protect Leela and their home. He set up small obstacles around the cabin, using rocks, logs, and simple barriers to create natural lines of defense. He showed Leela how to move quickly and quietly between hiding spots, how to observe without being noticed, and how to communicate silently through gestures and glances. Leela absorbed every lesson, her confidence growing with each practice. Takoda felt proud, not just of her skills, but of her courage and intuition. She was no longer a child who needed protection. She was his partner, able to sense danger and respond with care. Despite the threat outside, Takoda also focused on their emotional well-being. He knew that fear could erode trust and connection if left unchecked. He took moments to show Leela simple joys, watching the sun rise, finding wildflowers, laughing at small animals' antics, and even humming softly by the fire so she could feel the rhythm of his heart. These moments reminded them both why they were protecting their life together, and why their bond mattered more than the challenges that approached. One morning, Takoda noticed a change in the strangers' approach. They seemed more determined, moving closer to the cabin with purpose. Takoda realized that he could not simply wait. They might discover the cabin and put Leela at risk. He decided it was time to confront the situation with strategy and calm. He prepared the cabin for a temporary retreat, packing food and essentials into small bags while Leela observed and helped. Every action was precise, careful, and coordinated, showing the depth of trust they had developed. The confrontation happened just as the sun began to dip low in the sky. Takoda stepped forward, standing tall and confident with Leela at his side. Their presence alone made a statement. They were not afraid, they were not weak, and they would protect their home. The strangers paused, realizing that this was not a simple encounter. Takoda used gestures to communicate his intentions, peace, but also caution and firmness. Leela mirrored his gestures, her small hands steady, her eyes calm. Together, they formed a silent front of understanding and trust that the outsiders could not break. The strangers, seeing the quiet strength of Takoda and Leela, eventually decided to move on. Some of them were curious, others wary, but none dared to challenge the bond they had witnessed. Takoda watched them leave, then turned to Leela, allowing himself a rare smile. She returned it, her eyes shining with pride and relief. In that moment, Takoda realized that their connection had become their greatest strength. Together, they could face not just the challenges of the wilderness, but the uncertainties of the world beyond. In the following days, Takoda and Leela worked to restore the calm of their home. They repaired the cabin, organized their supplies, and returned to the quiet rhythms of daily life. Yet, the experience had changed them. They had discovered the depth of their trust, the courage they could summon together, and the extraordinary understanding that Leela had of Takoda's heart. He knew now that their bond was unbreakable, not just by danger, but by fear itself. Evenings returned to their peaceful routine. They would sit by the fire, Leela placing her hand on Takoda's chest, feeling the beat of his heart, and he would hum softly, allowing the vibrations to carry comfort and reassurance. They shared meals, practiced skills, and spent quiet moments observing the beauty of the plains. Takoda realized that the threat they had faced had strengthened their connection, teaching them resilience, patience, and the power of silent understanding. As the stars appeared in the sky, Takoda reflected on the journey so far. He had taken in a small, deaf girl who seemed fragile and in need of care, and in return, she had taught him more about trust, courage, and emotional connection than he had ever learned in years of solitude. She had become his partner, not just in survival, but in life, offering guidance, support, and the extraordinary ability to hear his heart in ways no one else could. For Leela, The experience had shown her that the world could be both dangerous and full of kindness. She had learned to trust Takoda completely, to sense his moods and intentions, and to act with courage and care. She had found safety, warmth, and a home, but more than that, she had discovered a bond that transcended words and sound, a connection that spoke through actions, glances, and the silent understanding of two hearts in harmony. In the quiet aftermath of the outside threat, Takoda and Leela returned to the routines that had become the foundation of their life together. They worked the land, tended the cabin, and explored the plains, always alert but no longer fearful. They had discovered a new rhythm, one built on shared understanding, silent communication, and the profound trust that comes from facing challenges together. The plains stretched endlessly around them, full of sunlight, shadows, and the whispering wind. Takoda and Leela walked side by side, their steps coordinated, their hearts connected. The world was vast and unpredictable, yet they had found something rare and enduring, each other. In a land of uncertainty, they had created a sanctuary of safety, love, and quiet understanding, proving that together, even the greatest challenges could be met with courage and grace. The seasons changed, and the plains shifted with them. The golden warmth of summer gave way to the cooler, softer light of early autumn. Takoda and Leela had grown stronger together, not just in survival but in their connection. Every day had become a testament to trust, courage, and the quiet power of understanding. The cabin, once a simple shelter, had grown into a home filled with laughter, shared work, and the peaceful rhythm of companionship. Takoda had noticed that Leela had grown more than just confident. She had grown wise in ways far beyond her years. She could anticipate changes in weather, sense the movements of animals, and even understand the subtle emotions that passed across Takoda's face. He realized that she had a gift, a way of hearing the world and people with her heart rather than her ears. This gift had changed him as much as it had changed her, allowing him to open up in ways he had long thought impossible. One crisp morning, they set out to explore a valley beyond the ridge, a place Takoda had once roamed as a young man. The grasses were dotted with wildflowers and the sky stretched endlessly above, clear and bright. Leela walked beside Takoda, her small hand brushing against the tall grass, feeling the soft wind on her face. Takoda watched her, a gentle smile on his face. He felt a sense of pride, gratitude, and a quiet joy that he had never known. Life had been lonely for so long, yet here was someone who understood him completely without a single word spoken. As they reached a small clearing near a stream, Takoda paused. He knelt down and traced patterns in the dirt with a stick, showing Leela the way animals moved and hid in the plains. She watched intently, her eyes following every motion. Then she mimicked his gestures, carefully tracing her own shapes in the soil. Takoda looked at her and felt a warmth that went beyond friendship. It was love, not loud or demanding, but steady, gentle, and profound. Leela, without knowing the words for it, had become the center of his life, the one who made every day worth facing. The afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Takoda and Leela returned to the cabin, their steps slow and relaxed. Along the way, they gathered berries, picked wild herbs, and paused to watch a family of deer cross the open land. Takoda realized that these moments, simple and quiet, were the ones that mattered most. They were not about adventure or survival. They were about connection, trust, and the beauty of shared experience. Leela's presence had transformed even the smallest parts of life into something extraordinary. That evening, as the sky turned a deep orange and the first stars appeared, Takoda started a fire outside the cabin. Leela sat nearby, arranging stones around the fire, her hands steady and precise. Takoda hummed softly, a tune that had become part of their evenings. Leela placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat, and in that moment he felt completely seen and understood. Words were unnecessary. Their hearts spoke a language that needed no sound. Takoda knew that he had found something rare, something that could not be broken by time, distance, or hardship. As the night deepened, a cool breeze swept across the plains. Takoda and Leela leaned against each other, looking up at the endless sky. He thought about the journey they had shared, the days of learning, the moments of fear, the small triumphs, and the quiet victories. Every step had led them to this moment of peace, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Leela, sensing his feelings, rested her head lightly against his shoulder, offering comfort, trust, and unspoken love. The following days were filled with shared work and small joys. They repaired fences, gathered firewood, and prepared food together. Takoda taught Leela how to preserve meat and herbs for the colder months, showing her techniques that had been passed down through generations. She learned quickly, her hands skillful and her mind alert. They also spent time exploring, following trails, and observing the animals and plants around them. Every day, their bond deepened, built on trust, care, and the extraordinary ability to sense each other's hearts. One morning, as they walked near the river, Takoda paused to watch Leela play with a small fawn that had wandered close. She reached out gently, letting the animal sniff her hand before it bounded away. Takoda marveled at her compassion, her patience, and the natural kindness that guided her actions. He realized that she had taught him something as well, how to feel fully, how to trust again, and how to love without reservation. In her presence, he felt alive in ways he had not experienced in years of solitude. As autumn deepened, the nights grew cooler. Takoda built a larger fire outside the cabin, and Leela helped gather extra wood to keep them warm. They sat together, sharing the warmth and the quiet, their hands often brushing, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. Takoda knew that their connection had grown beyond survival or companionship. It had become a partnership of hearts, a bond that would endure regardless of the challenges that lay ahead. One evening, as they watched the stars appear one by one, Takoda realized how much he had changed since meeting Leela. The loneliness that had weighed on him for so long had vanished, replaced with a deep sense of purpose and love. He had opened his heart fully, trusting another person completely, and in return he had been gifted with her understanding, her courage, and her quiet, unwavering care. Leela had not just entered his life, she had transformed it. The months passed, and the plains continued their cycles of life and change. Takoda and Leela faced small challenges, storms, scarcity of food, and the occasional wandering animal, but together they overcame every obstacle. Their connection made them resilient, their trust in each other unshakable. Takoda had once thought he would live and die in solitude, but now he knew that life's true gift was not the land, the animals, or even survival. It was the love and companionship they shared. One late autumn evening, as the wind carried the scent of falling leaves, Takoda and Leela sat outside the cabin, the fire casting a warm glow. Takoda reached over and gently held her hand. Leela placed her other hand over his, feeling the steady beat of his heart. In that quiet moment, Takoda realized that they had created something extraordinary, a life built on trust, understanding, and love that needed no words. She had not only learned from him, but she had also taught him the most important lesson of all, that the heart could speak louder than any words. The next morning, they ventured to the hilltop overlooking the plains. From there, they could see the endless expanse of land, stretching to the horizon, alive with color and movement. Takoda looked at Leela and saw the reflection of himself in her bright eyes, the courage, the curiosity, and the quiet strength that had become their shared bond. They sat together, letting the wind play through their hair, feeling the warmth of the sun and the steady connection of their hearts. It was a moment of peace, of completeness, and of gratitude for all they had shared. As the first snow of the season began to fall, Takoda and Leela returned to the cabin. They worked together to prepare for the colder months, gathering firewood, repairing the roof, and storing food. Each task was a collaboration, a demonstration of their shared understanding and trust. Leela moved with confidence, anticipating Takoda's instructions, while he relied on her insight and quick thinking. Their partnership was no longer defined by who taught whom, but by the mutual care and love they had built over many months. Even in the harsh winter days that followed, they found warmth in each other's presence. Takoda would hum softly, and Leela would place her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heart. They shared meals, worked together, and explored the snow-covered plains when it was safe. Life had become a series of small, meaningful moments, each one strengthened by their bond. Takoda realized that the gift of Leela's presence had changed the meaning of every day, transforming ordinary tasks into acts of love, care, and connection. As winter deepened, Takoda reflected on the journey they had shared. From the first day he found Leela alone near the creek, to the days of learning, exploration, and quiet companionship, to the challenges they had faced together. Each step had brought them closer, each trial had strengthened their bond, and each shared moment had revealed the depth of their connection. He understood now that love was not always loud or spoken. Sometimes it was silent, steady, and unwavering, felt deeply in the heart. On a clear winter night, as the fire crackled and the stars shone above, Takoda and Leela sat side by side. He reached for her hand, and she placed her other hand over his, their fingers entwining naturally. He felt her warmth, her trust, and the extraordinary ability she had to hear the language of his heart. Takoda knew, in that moment, that their lives were forever intertwined. They had faced solitude, fear, and uncertainty, yet together they had created a life filled with trust, love, and hope. As the wind whispered through the snow-covered grasses, Takoda smiled quietly. Leela looked at him, her eyes shining with understanding and affection. In their silence, they communicated everything that needed to be said. Life on the plains was unpredictable, sometimes harsh, but they had found something stronger than any challenge: each other. In the quiet of the wilderness, they had discovered the true meaning of connection, companionship, and the extraordinary power of hearts that could hear one another without words. And so, the lonely Apache and the girl who had once been alone became a family, a team, and a source of love for one another. Together, they faced the seasons, the challenges, and the beauty of the world around them, knowing that no matter what the future held, their bond was unbreakable, their hearts forever connected, and their lives richer than they had ever imagined.